The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Do you know what lies within nothing?
No.
Do you know where it ends? Do you want to know?
Yes. Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.
So hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. We're doing this super-sized series within a series about Mary, Queen of Scots. This is part 4 of There's Something About Mary, Queen of Scots. And I have a special guest. And my special guest, when I tell you who it is, you're going to be like, I might know what direction this story is headed, but do you? Welcome, Alison Epstein.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry my presence here is a spoiler in and of itself. That some silly things are going to be afoot, but always happy to serve.
I just want to say also my other special guest here is Hepburn the cat, who is actively walking right past my microphone.
There she goes.
I think she's just here being like, her name is Hepburn, but she wants to disavow anyone in the story whose surname is also Hepburn. That's nothing to do with her. She's never been to Scotland in her life. Honestly, every time I read in the story, it's like Hepburn and this, and I'm just like,
Hepburn would
Hepburn.
never.
No, exactly. Okay, so Alison, you're here on this episode, and I'm working on an assumption that some people might have just joined this podcast just for this series. So maybe they've never heard from you before. So can you explain who you are and what your connection is to the story of Mary, Queen of Scots?
Yes, absolutely. I am Anne's friend who shows up sometimes. Hello to the Tits Out Brigade if you have not heard from me before. I am a historical fiction author of 2 books, and my first book was sort of adjacently about Mary, Queen of Scots. We'll be getting into the part that I wrote about in my book later, so I'm partly here as a Mary, Queen of Scots scheme enthusiast. I am also the author of what I refer to as the companion newsletter to Vulgar History, the podcast. It's called Dirtbags Through the Ages. You can find it on Substack, in which I write about men who are usually men who are a time. A time is had by the people that I write about in my newsletter. So that's kind of the vibe that I bring on Vulgar History is, oh, a thing is really going to happen here, and we're going to get it.
Yeah. I also like having Alison around when there's a story with a lot of shocking twists and turns because you're really good at reacting to shocking twists and turns.
I have an expressive voice. Also, I realized I'm the worst at plugging my own work because I did not say the name of my book, which is A Tip for the Hangman. Sorry, it's available where you buy books. My editor is screaming at me right now.
We're going to talk about it at the end as well. Like, we'll have lots of time for you to plug all of your various projects. But yeah, the overlap here as well is that Allison has done 2 of her newsletter episodes about somebody who we're going to be talking about today. But I explained to Allison before that I'm really trying to, and I'll tell you again, listeners, I'm trying to tell this story the way that Mary herself would have experienced it, where she meets somebody, she doesn't know what they're going to be like later on. She doesn't know what is going to happen. So I don't want to reveal that anybody is this way or that way until Mary herself, when it becomes obvious to her. And one of the reasons I'm doing that is because, firstly, some people, a lot of people listening, don't know the story. And I don't want to assume that you do. But also because I've read, and I'll say all my sources in a minute, but I think all of them, and this is not a critique of them, because I've been reading like nonfiction books about Mary Queen of Scots, and I don't know how many people pick those up who don't already know the story, but there's a lot of parts in all of these books where they're just like, little did she know that this person would blah, blah, blah. Like, there's a lot of like, the stories are not told. The stories are really told because what happened to her later is well known to a lot of people, but not to everybody. So I'm really trying to, and also when you talk about her story as though you know what's going to happen later, it's a way to make her sound like a dumbass, to be like, well, she just did this, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, of course she did this. Like, with the information she had, that's what she did. But if you're like, well, didn't she know that? It's like, no, she didn't know. Like,
Because she did not live in 2023 and have all access to all of the books of her own life. No, she didn't.
no, yeah, I'm coming in this recording session. Actually, no, if we would record this last night, I would be coming in hot because I had been reading some sources that were just being like, well, this is why she was a dumb. And it's like, if only she had done this, all this stuff wouldn't have happened. And it's like, okay, we're going to like, this is part of why I'm doing like a whatever 8-part series, but like we're going step by step through everything that happened. And so I want to recap what we've talked about in previous episodes first. And just to be like, the fact that she's like getting out of bed every day is remarkable at this point,
Yeah.
let alone what's going to happen later. So to recap all of this, especially because for everybody, but also Allison I sent her my notes. So you know what I've talked about before because we're recording this before the episodes came out. So there's a lot of characters and we need to explain them all. So Mary Queen of Scots, she was born in Scotland and then her father died 6 days later. And then she became Queen of Scots. I like that she had her coronation. They like were like, here's your crown, but they can't like put it on her head because she's like,
She's baby. So I want there to be a tiny crown for baby. Because for Scotland, that would have gotten a lot of use, right? You would have used baby crown fairly often.
there was like 6 baby monarchs in a row, her being the 6th one. Yes. So she became Queen of Scots. And then her mother is Marie de Guise, 6 foot tall, amazing, did what she could, but just like the asshole lords are pervasive and everywhere, trying to make there be a Scottish Protestant Reformation. Eventually, just to strengthen her position, so Mary is sent to France, where it's decided that she's going to marry the heir to the throne in France. Her mother-in-law there is Catherine de Medici, just growing into her own like power. Anyway, so Mary goes to France, and then she goes to France, and you know what? I was thinking through her life last night, and it's like the first 5 years of her life were just kind of like on the run, fleeing in the middle of the night, having to go somewhere. So it's like, guess what? She's getting like some trauma. Like, even if she doesn't understand what's happening between ages 0 and 5, if you have to like flee constantly because people are trying to kill you and kidnap you all the time, like you're gonna like absorb some of that, right? Even if subconsciously. So she goes to France and she spends the next 13 years of her life there, and it's basically great. She grows up with the French royal children. So she grows up with the man or the boy who's going to become her husband, as well as his siblings. So she's really close to Francis, who's the heir to the throne. And then there's also Princess Elizabeth. She's also really close to them. And then when she's around 15 years old, first the King of France dies of, as I describe it, a splinter to the eye.
I did want to say you described that in a very lighthearted and not agonizing way compared to what I think happened, which was a jousting lance through the brain. But,
Yes.
trigger warning for eye
yeah.
stuff there.
Yeah, a splinter to the eye. So anyway, he suddenly died. Nobody expected this. Like, what they thought was going to happen was Mary would marry the heir to the throne. The king would die 20 years later or whatever. But anyway, he died suddenly because he was a dumbass who was just like, I'm going to do a jousting. Even though jousting at that point was like kind of old fashioned and weird and not a thing you did. He's like, let's do like a Ren fair, like for fun. And then he died. So then suddenly Mary and her husband were the king and queen of France, aged, I think, 14 and 15. And so then she becomes queen. She has these dirtbag uncles, the De Guise bros, who are just like, this is great for us. We're going to like get so much power because our niece is the queen. And they do. Like they've really, by now, they sort of infiltrated every level of French government and society. And so they have a lot of power, especially because she's the queen. And they were probably assuming like, and she will be the queen for the next 20 years. No, her husband dies of basically a brain tumor / ear infection. So he was always really sick in the first place. And then he dies. So now she's like 16 years old, 15, 16, the widowed dowager queen of France. And Catherine de Medici is like, oh my God, this is my chance to get these De Guise bros out of here. So because they've been like trying to get too much power, Catherine de Medici is like, okay, no, the new king is her even younger son, Charles. She's the regent. And Mary is like, okay, like, I'm kind of a queen without a country. That's the name of her Royal Diaries book, Mary Queen of Scots, A Queen Without a Country. Anyway, shout out to Royal Diaries fans. And anyway, she and her uncles are like, okay, well, let's marry her to the next king. Like, let's Catherine of Aragon this up. But Catherine de Medici is just like, no, like, this is my chance to get the De Guise bros out of here. And if their niece is no longer the queen, then they won't have any power. So then she doesn't let her marry the son. So Mary's just kind of like in France, just being like, what do I do? I don't know. No one really tells her what to do, which it's not like, oh, she needs someone to tell her what to do, but it's like she needs helpers. She needs advisors. She's this like teenager who thought for the next 40 years of her life she would just be in France, and suddenly it's not happening. So then she decides her older half brother, James Stewart, who we are calling Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, comes in and is like, here's the deal. Like, why don't you come back to Scotland and like your half brother, can help you out. And she's not like, okay, great. And she like trusts him immediately, but it's like, she has to trust somebody. She has to go somewhere. And family is really important to her. And she's like, you know what? Like, I don't know what else to do. So I will go to Scotland. So she goes to Scotland, which is like just in the midst of the Scottish Reformation in a sort of tentative way where it like could revert at any time to being Catholic again. It's really, the Reformation hinges on the actions of John Knox, the
Noted asshole.
Okay, what are your feelings? Oh my God. Every time I come across him in a book, I just involuntarily, I just like shake my head. I'm just like, oh, him. No, no,
One side trip about John Knox that I'm sure you've already discussed in
please.
episodes 1 through 3 of the
Yeah.
series, but I'm so conflicted about John Knox because A, he is objectively the worst. I cannot stand him. But B, in the Margot Robbie, Saoirse Ronan, Mary Queen of Scots film, he was played by David Tennant, love of my life, and so I'm always a little bit like, "Oh, but it's David Tennant though. What do I do?" But
Yeah.
no, he has no redeeming qualities except one time David Tennant played him.
Yeah. No, exactly. David Tennant in like 50 pounds of fake hair played
Is
him.
the biggest prosthetic beard I've ever seen. The fact that it wasn't in the credits as John Knox's beard, missed opportunity.
I know. And also they really should have credited that beard performer because that was half of the performance for him. Maybe it was motion capture. Maybe he just had like little green dots on his face and they just like inserted the beard in after. I don't know. Yeah. So John Knox, the worst. He's just like, he really, through force of character, really made the Scottish Reformation happen because he was just apparently so persuasive at his like speech giving that everyone is just like, yeah, you know what? Let's all be Protestant. Great. So Mary Queen of Scots comes over and she's Catholic, and they're like, ugh. Like, it was not so long ago in England, Mary the First came in to be a Catholic queen, and she sort of notoriously executed a lot of Protestants. So people are like, queen who's named Mary, who's Catholic, like, how's this going to go? And she's like, no, it's cool. I'm cool with Protestants. I'm cool with Catholics. Like, let's just like all be chill and like not have a civil war against each other, which continues to be her approach throughout most of the story. So she's like, I'm Catholic. Like, I can't change that. That's who I am. So like, I'm going to still celebrate Catholic Mass myself, but like the country can be Protestant. Let's all just get along. And her half brother is kind of encouraging this. He's kind of like, yeah, like that's the approach. Like, let's go with this. The asshole lords, of whom several of them have names that we'll get into, are upset about this. John Knox is upset about this. John Knox is coming in real hot, just being like, this 18-year-old widow, he's like, well, she looks like some kind of whore because she's Catholic and obviously a whore.
It's real incel energy coming from John Knox.
It's real, like, it's not about her. It's just about, there's nothing she could have done to make him not hate her because her very existence threatened the Reformation.
She was a Catholic, she was a woman, and she was tall. That was 3 strikes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So she confronted him almost right away. Like when she got to Scotland, she's like, I need to like nip this in the bud. But he just kind of came in, speaking of coming in hot, just impromptu suddenly started mansplaining a sermon to her to the point that she just started crying because he was so intense and scary. And she realized that like she really couldn't stop this guy. And yeah, it just so I'm going to mention this a bunch of times probably, but there's a real when people talk about Mary Queen of Scots, they often talk about her in comparison to Queen Elizabeth, right? Because they were both around at the same time and they were both women rulers in countries that had not previously had successful women rulers. And even at the time this was sort of being built, like the PR around them was kind of like Mary is like hot-headed and passionate and leads from the heart, but Elizabeth is like cool and like intellectual and like, and this is what people still often think of them as and compare them to each other. And that all comes from John Knox because John Knox was like, Mary is fiery and passionate. Like he said all these things before she done anything except for like show up and be an 18-year-old Catholic widow. He was like, she's fiery and passionate and sexual. And it's like, no, she just wears cute outfits and is Catholic. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, and I said this in the previous episode, was the one who's actively having an affair with a married man who threw his wife down a flight of stairs.
Another man we love to a lot.
Who's the passionate whore is my question.
I mean, the answer to who the passionate whore is, it's Robert Dudley, but
Yes, absolutely. And later someone else that will reveal to be a dirtbag. But just the fact that John Knox was like, no, Elizabeth, she's smart. Like John Knox was like, women shouldn't be rulers in general because women suck and are dum-dums. But Elizabeth is the exception to that. She's actually okay because she's basically a man. And his whole thing was like, she's Protestant, and so she's okay. And Mary was Catholic, and so she wasn't okay. And so he's the one who was like, Mary's passionate, leads from the heart. Elizabeth is cool and an exception and rules like a man. That was him who started that, and people still contrast them in that way in some of the books I've been reading. And I just want to be like, that is not how I see things. So
part of that I think is also just, like, the Catholic Protestant stereotypes that, like, were going on at this. I mean, the Protestants are you're only wearing black unadorned clothing, and you keep all of your emotions super close, and you repress everything, and the Catholics are those fiery French, Italian people, like, it's such a complicated web of associations. Renaissance religious racism is a very odd time.
yeah, no, absolutely for sure. And we're going to get into that because last time we were talking about, yeah, onto the scene came David Rizzio, who came as part of a diplomatic envoy group. But then he was kind of like, like I feel like my chances might be better to like improve my lot if I stay in Scotland. He heard rumors that there was an opening in Mary's new like supersized chapel choir. They needed a fourth bass. Turns out David Rizzio, gorgeous bass voice. And he gets the gig. And then Mary is like, wait, who's that guy with the gorgeous bass voice? And she starts hanging out with him, playing cards, which is one of her hobbies. Going horseback riding and stuff. And she realizes that he grew up in like the diplomatic corps and he's actually really smart and useful. So she takes him on, like she gives him increasing amounts of jobs, basically. He gets a bed. When he first arrived, he had to sleep on cabinet or something, a chest of drawers. There's a real bed shortage, I have to say. This comes up every now and then in various books, but like Mary came to Scotland with like 100 beds, and that's like 100, I don't know, more beds than Scotland had at that point, apparently.
You think that's why John Knox was so suspicious about her romantic intentions because she was trying to shoehorn the only one bed trope, the Scottish court?
She just brought over these beds and I wanted to share the beds. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Who did Rizzio share a bed with? But anyway, so there's a bed shortage, but then he got a bedroom and he started doing great. But people are suspicious of him because he was Italian and Catholic, right? And they're all like, that must mean he's up to no good. And it's like, no, like maybe, but who's up to no good is like every Protestant person at royal court who are all constantly betraying and like cutting each other's arms off and whatever. Like this is like a brutal situation. Oh yeah, so I didn't mention, so she came to Scotland. She went on a little trip up north to visit, as I've recently learned, my people, the Highlanders. She was a big fan of them. She bought some plaid fabric. She like started incorporating bagpipes into her like music parties. She's just like leading it. She's really enjoying it, as many tourists do. But then while she's up there, her brother, who I have at this point of the podcast revealed was a piece of shit, really wanted power and land. And so he turned Mary against this guy, George Gordon, aka Cock o' the North. Allison, thoughts on the name Cock o' the
Was
North?
delighted to see this in your notes. Really regret that we don't currently give people nicknames like that. You may refer to me as Cock of the North if you'd like to.
Yeah. Cock o' Chicago is how we'll call you.
COC, we love it.
Yeah. So Cock o' the North, who was a really, really powerful Catholic landowner, and he had like 20,000 men at the drop of a hat who would follow him. And he was like, Mary, like, if you want, I can like bring these 20,000 men. We can make Scotland Catholic again. Like, say the word. But Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart wanted his land and didn't want the country to be Catholic, so he manipulated Mary into basically starting a civil war against Cock of the North, who ended up losing this battle. One of his sons was executed, his other son was put in jail, and Cock of the North was going to go to jail, but then he had a heart attack and died on his horse. 7 months later, his embalmed body was stood up in a coffin and taken to Parliament and put on trial. Guess what? He couldn't defend himself being a corpse, and he was found guilty of treason.
That tends to happen when you put the corpse on trial for treason, is they're usually found guilty of treason.
Yeah, he really couldn't mount a very good defense at all, being dead. Anyway, so the result of that was that Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart now became the Earl of Moray, which in Scotland is pronounced Murray. And in a lot of books, they refer to him as just that, Moray, as his name, but I call him Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. And that happened. Rizzio came on the scene, but people were really racist against him. Anyway, everyone's scheming. Schemes are flying. Mary realizes she has to get married. And she's been in Scotland now for, I think, 3 to 4 years. Like, she has not gotten married yet. It's not like she came there and she's all like, I'm such a passionate sexual person. I can't control myself. No, she's like, it was really important who her husband was going to be. Lots of people, lots of ideas. I like this part where Elizabeth was like, if you marry who I tell you, then I'll make you heir to the throne. And that was the whole thing Mary wanted. Her whole life story really is she wanted to be named heir to the throne to Elizabeth because that would give her more power over the asshole lords, basically, if she was considered heir to the throne of England. And she was Elizabeth's preferred candidate to be heir to the throne because the other options were like the Grey sisters, who were just busy having super secret marriages, getting pregnant while in jail with their husbands. Like, Elizabeth was just like not them. I guess the other option is like Ferdinando, but he was Catholic also.
He was busy with his acrobats, so there was no time.
Ferdinando, aka Lord Strange, is busy with Lord Strange's tumblers, which is a real thing that he had. A group of acrobats, yes. Anyway, but Elizabeth was like, well, I can't just name her heir to the throne just like that. So she's like, I need to manipulate him. Elizabeth, by the way, is working with William Cecil, who comes out in this story, in my understanding now. So in the Cate Blanchett movie, he's played by Sir Richard Attenborough from Jurassic Park. And so that's what I'm picturing, just this kind of little Santa Claus-like guy with a twinkle in his eye, but who's actually the smartest person in this whole story. I will give him that.
He's scheming like no one's business, yeah.
He's 20 steps ahead, but he knows, and those 20 steps all happen because he knows exactly how everyone else is going to react, how everyone's going to act. Elizabeth did very well for herself as queen, and that was largely because she had him on her side, and he knew what to do. Mary did not have him, and that's part of where she is struggling. Anyway, Elizabeth is like, you should marry who I choose. I choose my own boyfriend, Robert Dudley, aka Bobby Duds.
Which is the thing I feel like history does not talk enough about, is the time that Queen Elizabeth tried to get her boyfriend and marry Queen of Scots to form a throuple.
Yeah, which literally is it. She was the letters are here's what's going to happen. You marry my boyfriend, come down here, we'll all live together. Elizabeth will bankroll their whole life. She's like, you and I will live like sisters. And I'm like, sister wives? Are you proposing sister wives?
I've read that fanfic in multiple fandoms. I know how this works.
Yeah. So Mary Queen of Scots is like, I'll think about it. But then eventually Bobby Duds himself is like, wait, no one asked me and I don't want this. And so he shoots that down. Anyway, meanwhile, in a various series of various weird reasons, there's this guy called Lennox who used to be in love with Marie de Guise, but then she turned him down. So then he was like, screw you. And then he fled to England and teamed up with Henry VIII against her, which meant that he had to forfeit all of his lands and properties in Scotland.
To clarify, not right now he went off with Henry VIII, right? Henry VIII is...
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, this was 18 years ago. So Lennox, historically, this is what he did. So he's been in England for the last 18 years. because he helped out Henry VIII let him marry his niece, who was Lady Margaret Douglas, who I did an episode about in the Ladies Trapped in Towers season. And then they have a son, and their son is called Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. And they raise him. I say this in the episode as well, but I'll say it here again because I know you have feelings about Charles Dickens. I have not read Great Expectations, but I've seen the movie. And as I understand it, Miss Havisham raises Estella from birth to be a weapon to like avenge the wrongs of men against her or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I was left at the altar, therefore I will raise this small child who I found to hate men so much on my behalf. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, it's like that with Lennox and Lady Margaret Douglas and Darnley, except they raise him from an early age to become the next king. Like they raise him, they're like, here's what we're going to do: usurp power, and you're going to be the king. And he's raised from an early age to be like that. Now, does that explain everything about his personality? No, but that explains some of his personality. So he was, I'm going to use the word, I'm so sorry, groomed. I think it's appropriate in this circumstance to think of himself as the king,
Politically
like
groomed.
literally brought
Yeah.
up this way. Politically groomed. Yes. Anyway, so then Lennox kind of tricks Elizabeth to letting him up to Scotland. Mary is like, oh, this is great. And then Darnley shows up in Scotland as well. And then it's kind of, Mary's like, you know what? So through Lady Margaret Douglas, Darnley has a claim to the throne of England because his mother was Henry VIII's niece. And then his father was also descended from one of the previous kings of England. So he's got like double claims to, so him and Mary's got a claim to the throne of England because her grandmother was Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister. So Darnley's grandmother was also Margaret Tudor. They are, in fact, cousins through different lines. Anyway, the two of them together is like a real threat to Elizabeth. And if they have a child, that child will have like, I don't know, 5 times the claim to the throne of England as anyone else. So like she's like, you know what, politically this just makes sense. And in a happy coincidence, Darnley, who's like roughly her age, I think he's like 20 and she's 23. He's like, Elizabeth described him as a long lad,
Which I love.
which means he's tall. He is a long lad. So Mary Queen of Scots is around 6 feet tall. Darnley is like 6 foot to 6'3". Like these are not the heights of very many people around them for like nutrition based reasons. So I think to Mary, just being a tall person who likes to wear heels, as I've discovered, she's just like, oh my God, I never dreamed that I could marry someone who's my same height. What a dream. And he's also apparently super hot. Like everyone wrote about him, his face, like facially, he's just like really, 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 really good looking. Some people say that as soon as Mary saw him, she like fell in love immediately and an instant lust. I would like to debunk that because that record comes from a thing written after the fact by Darnley's father.
Not an impartial man.
He was not there at the time. Anyway, so Mary, it's not like she was like head over heels in love with Darnley, but she was just like, okay, this makes sense. He's kind of hot. That's a bonus. So we ended last time with she married Darnley. So a lot of people were upset about that because like they knew that he was Catholic, although he wasn't really religious. He was kind of
Meh.
like religion fluid. He could like go whatever way. He wasn't really committed to one thing or another.
Which really makes him a great political match for Mary at this point, who's like actively not trying to have a civil war. Like she's not pulling in a John Knox level intense man. Like this
Yeah,
guy,
no,
he's fine.
exactly.
He's hot. He's just here to have a good time. He really makes my family tree very effective. Also, I can see his face without bending down.
Yeah, no. So in terms of the on paper, this is like a great match for her, and they get a dispensation from the Pope because they're first cousins, and then they get married, and that's where we ended last time. So I just want to take a pause at this point to just mention all of my references because there's so many books written about Mary Queen of Scots, and I really appreciate the ones that I've been referring to, which are mostly quite recent, which I appreciate also because they bring in the latest scholarship, but also they come from a point of view that is less like, look at this dumb dumb, and more just kind of like, let's treat her kindly. So I'm going to list the titles. Some of them are, some of the titles might spoil future events. So skip ahead 30 seconds if you really don't know the story and you really don't want to be spoiled. So Daughters of the North, Jean Gordon, Mary Queen of Scots by Jennifer Morag Henderson. David Rizzio and Mary Queen of Scots, Murder at Holyrood by David Tweedy. Embroidering Her Truth, Mary Queen of Scots and the Language of Power by Claire Hunter. Mary Queen of Scots and the Murder of Lord Darnley by Alison Weir. Mary Queen of Scots, The True Life of Mary Stuart by John Guy, and also the novella Rizzio by Denise Mina. So the novella Rizzio by Denise Mina, I read it a while ago, like when I just sort of not in the season, just as like an enthusiast about Mary Queen of Scots' life. And when I reread it now in the sense of research, there's some stuff in that novella where I was like, it's really, really well researched. And some stuff in that I was just like, well, obviously she made up that part. And then in one of the biographies, I'm like, oh no, like that was true. And that, so like, there's a couple of passages in this episode in my notes that I'm going to, because Denise Mina honestly explained some stuff the best way that I was able to understand it. So I'm going to, the layout of some rooms, for instance, like she really explains it well. Anyway, so at this point, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart has fled to England because after Mary married Darnley, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart raised an army against her, and he's like, "We're all in this, right? Everyone hates this, right?" But in fact, no. He went to Edinburgh expecting the people of Edinburgh would take his side. They did not, because Mary Queen of Scots was like, and I do want to emphasize at this point, so popular among like the common people. Like she really, it's in a Princess Diana-esque way. She really connected with the everyday people. Like she took all these progresses every summer. She'd travel around the country. Like she liked to meet people, and she was so charming and lovely. And gift giving was her language, her love language. Like everyone really liked her, except for the people who, for religious reasons, had to hate her, you know? So basically, everyone was just happy. They're happy that their glamorous, beautiful young queen, this young widow, has a new husband. Like, there's this new sexy marriage happening. Like, everyone's happy about it.
And also it's not entirely just that she's charming and beautiful, right? She's also really good at this politically. Like, she's raised by Catherine de Medici and the de Guises. She's not just, like, swanning around having a lovely time. She's like, "Okay, I need these people need to like me because I'm in a dangerous position here. Let me make sure that the people are on my side here." And I don't think she always gets enough credit for, like, she doesn't just stumble into popularity. She's working for that.
Oh, great point, Allison. And yes, for sure, absolutely. And that's the other thing too. Our other frequent podcast co-host, Lana Wood Johnson, she said repeatedly, like, there's this narrative around Mary Queen of Scots that she's like this victim, that all these things just happened to her, and she was helplessly watching it all happen. It's like, no, like what you just said, she was raised by Catherine de Medici and the de Guises. Like she is so canny and so clever and so smart, and yeah, and that's why I really want in these episodes to really look at like who she was and what she was doing versus this kind of general understanding of her as just kind of like a person that stuff happened around, and she was like naive and being like, "What? You do what?"
She's making every single thing happen that happens.
No, exactly, exactly. And yeah, and that's where it's like when she chooses to ally with a person, it's not because she's just like a silly woman who's like, "Oh, you're handsome." It's like she like really weighs out the pros and cons. And also like knowing how many enemies she has, she needs to figure out like who's going to be on my side in this. Like she knows she has to ally with somebody, and she really makes those choices actively. But yeah, you're right. The whole thing where like the everyday people love her is very much something that she cultivates and that she knows. And that's part of why she's able to defeat her brother. And it was called the chase about raids, because she had an army and he had an army, and they kept chasing. They never actually met each other in battle because they're all just chasing each other.
A real Benny Hill scenario. I love it.
Yeah, is the soundtrack of it, but on bagpipes. Anyway, so the chase about raids happened, and one of the reasons why she defeated him is because he went to Edinburgh thinking the people there would be on his side, but in fact they were all on her side because she, like you just said, like she knew that was going to be help, and that's the situation in which that came in clutch. The people of Edinburgh were like, "No thanks, bro. Like we're not on your side. Like we like her
Also,
actually."
the people of Edinburgh really love a 6 foot tall lady who takes charge of things. Like, good for them.
Yeah, yeah, who wears amazing outfits that I'm about to talk about. So, and in fact, her new era had begun. So, ever since her first husband Francis died, she was wearing black and white only, both for like mourning reasons, but also probably because that kind of helped her be, it's like her business outfit. Like when she's doing like official queen work, she's like, I wear black all the time. And that like hopefully will make these Protestants take me more seriously. But also it made her, and oh, and I didn't mention she has 4 best friends, all called Mary, the 4 Marys. And they would walk around wearing their like black and white French outfits and just look so stunning. And everyone's just like, what is this fashion moment happening? Like iconic. Anyway, but then she got married. And so before she married Darnley, she, like we know, so that one book I mentioned, the Embroidering Her Truth, Mary Queen of Scots in the Language of Power by Claire Hunter. So it's a book, and a lot of what Claire Hunter was looking at were these records of like who bought what and when. And it's an angle that no one's really done with Mary Queen of Scots before, where it's like if you look at when she bought what fabrics, you can really see what she was planning and what she was thinking. And before she married Darnley, she ordered so many bright colored patterned fabrics. So, like, she's planning a new era. It's very Taylor Swift of her, frankly.
It is. It also, like, I love that she's trying to coordinate her outfits to him because Darnley was notoriously, like, really good at, like, getting himself dressed in the morning. Like, they both look fantastic.
Exactly, exactly. So she's like, we're gonna have our outfits are gonna they're gonna go play off each other. There's gonna be colors. So her wardrobe was later inventoried. So we learned that she had all different. So she had her own outfits for just like daily life, but she also liked a mask party. She liked a disguise. She liked a costume. I'm going to talk about that in much detail in a second by Allison. So when her wardrobe was later inventoried, her like tickle trunk of like costumes. So we learned that she had feathers of different colors, fringed masking costumes, headdresses of silver and red and yellow, quote, Egyptian hats. So the royal court like refocused now on like parties, tournaments, having a great time. It's just kind of like we have a young, sexy, married couple. Like she's out of mourning. Like let's have colors. And this is all overseen by party planner slash unofficial Secretary of State, Davy Rizzio, who is just like bringing his like Italian slash French know-how to like just have these amazing parties that nothing like Edinburgh has ever seen before. Mary also loved wearing disguises. Yeah, I mean, frankly, disguises. So days before her marriage to Darnley, for instance, she and her four Marys caused something of a scandal when they put on their like, so they had a hobby where they like to dress like peasant women
Sure.
and make marmalade. So they like to just like play act being normal people. It's a very like proto Marie Antoinette vibe. Anyway, so before her marriage to Darnley, they put on their like peasant woman disguises and they went around town gathering money for a banquet, like begging basically. Not saying who they were, pretending they were just like women and one of them was getting married. And this tradition, I don't know if this happened before or if Mary caused this tradition, but this still happens in Scotland where brides to be accompanied by their gal pals in a kind of hen party sort of thing. They take to the streets at night, banging saucepans, demanding money from passing men.
That's delightful.
So she just, yeah, so she just wanted to take part in this thing. But people were like, she's 6 feet tall. We know what the queen looks like because she like comes to meet us a lot. Actually, I want to say something else. So if you look at any portrait of her, so her hair is always pulled back in portraits, but you can see the first like couple inches of her hair, and it's like very curly. I was looking up the hair traits. I forget what it is, but I think she's like a 3C hair curl type pattern. Like it's really, really, like Carrie Russell on Felicity is like her hair texture. It seems like, but one of her Marys was responsible for doing her hair, and it's described relentlessly as crimping whatever is done to her hair. So was her hair actually curly, or did they have some sort of like Renaissance era crimping iron? Not
I
sure.
hope they had Renaissance era crimping irons. I mean, we're getting close to the 1590s, like the 1990s. Could be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. So anyway, so she had like very distinctive looking Carrie Russell and Felicity hair. Anyway, she also, I previously discussed this. So when she went on horseback riding, and she learned this from Catherine de' Medici, she would wear trousers inside of her skirt so that she could ride the horse astride.
Another very 1990s look, really.
Pants under skirt, yeah, for sure. And part of the reason she did that too is because she was so tall. Like she had to, like you could see her skirt would ride up when she's on the horse anyway, so the pants would cover her legs. But also, she also enjoyed putting on men's clothes for funsies. So before her Darnley marriage, she would just walk, and I think potentially after, I can't imagine why she would stop. Like she and Darnley, she put on her men's clothes, he was wearing the men's clothes he was already wearing, and they just kind of like walked around the streets of Stirling, being like, hello, fellow men. Yeah, so she would dress as a man with Darnley on more than one occasion to walk around town. So she liked cross-dressing. Like, that's what I'm going to say. Like, she liked all different kinds of clothes, and some of the clothes she liked were ones that generally were worn by men.
You can check off pants on the bingo card.
You can have pants on the bingo card, but also I haven't read anything that's talking about like Mary Queen of Scots and like gender identity, but I'm going to say it. Like, she's not adhering to a gender binary. She's just not. Like, she just sometimes she wears pants, sometimes she wears a dress, and it's in a culture where like only men wear pants. And she routinely was known for enjoying wearing pants sometimes. So I think that's interesting.
And good for her.
Yeah, so she also appeared in trousers at a farewell masque given in honor of the French ambassador in 1566. She and the Marys all did, and this caused like quite a stir. So the fact that she was known for wearing pants is just, I think, really like we talk about on this podcast, like the pants moments, but often that's like people who have to put on pants to disguise, to run away, like that sort of thing. But she was just like, hey, it's a pants day. Like, I'm just wearing my pants today. So I don't know if that's like a gender thing or if that's just like a fashion thing, but she just was just like, that's what's going on. Which I love in the sense of like John Knox, and not necessarily just for gender reasons, did this horrified John Knox, but he saw any wearing of disguises as unnatural and immoral, a rejection of the human form bestowed by God. And she just really liked wearing disguises all the time. It's sort of like, I don't know, like the high fashion way that she lived her life. Like it's maybe like in modern terms, like a Lady Gaga-esque thing where she's just like, today I'm going to wear this. And then tomorrow I'm going to look like a milkmaid. And then the next day, like she's just kind of expressing herself through what she wore.
She's having fun with it, and she's not letting anybody tell her what she can and can't do.
Exactly. So at Scottish court as well, I just wanted to point out men would also cross-dress for fun sometimes at parties, including Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart on at least one occasion. So, and she also put on all these mask performances, like the Davy Rizzio would help her write, and she would perform roles in those things, and she would wear costumes for those. Like she just liked a costume moment. So I wanted to bring up homosexuality for a moment because we're talking about cross-dressing anyway. So at this point, like men were sleeping with each other, and that was just kind of like a thing that was happening. And if it was rich, noble guys, it's just kind of like you hand wave it away, basically. Like legally speaking, sodomy, quote unquote, was a sin, but also it's just kind of like, don't worry about it if it's two rich dudes.
Yeah, it's a very weird way they thought about homosexuality in the Renaissance, which is that they didn't think of it as like there was no such thing as sexual orientation in the Renaissance. You weren't like straight or gay. They legislated the acts and not the identity. So it was like sodomy itself is a thing that a person can do, and that is illegal. So don't get caught, but the rich can get away with anything, basically. But it wasn't like this person is queer as an entity. That wasn't an idea that they really had.
Exactly. So there is this ongoing sort of theory that Davy Rizzio was maybe sleeping with Darnley. And that's because there was, I have it somewhere in my notes, but basically, Davy Rizzio was very unpopular among the haters, people who were racist against Italians, people who hated Catholics, people who didn't like how much power this outsider was getting. And one guy wrote, like, he's so grabbling, he's like overly ambitious and whatever. And so this guy wrote sort of a paragraph being like, Davy Rizzio, like he's sucking up to Darnley, it's so gross. And he mentions in this paragraph, and they share the same bed. But like this paragraph written by a hater of Rizzio, the point of it is not they're fucking. The point of that paragraph is like he's scheming. He's like overly ambitious. Like that's the insult.
Right? Because we have that saying still in, like, modern day, like, "Oh, they're in bed with somebody else. You're in bed with corporate interests." Like, we still say that. It doesn't necessarily mean the literal thing, and also, we've already established that there were not enough beds in this palace, so
There were not. There were not. Davy Rizzio had only recently moved up from sleeping on like a sideways chest of drawers. So that's what I wanted to point out, that like that one thing, that's the only thing that hints that at the relationship between Davy Rizzio and Darnley is like they were, quote, quote, they were in bed together. But that has been extrapolated to mean like maybe they were lovers, which is like maybe they were, but I don't know. I do not know, but I wanted to just like nod towards that was a rumor that people had. Not helping with these rumors, there's also a rumor that Davy Rizzio was the lover of Mary. And a lot of this is just kind of like Davy Rizzio is an Italian, and everyone's like, he's a horn dog, Catholic, he has to be fucking somebody. And these are the two people we see him with. But okay, so even by early on in her pregnancy, so Mary got pregnant probably during the chase about raids when she and Darnley were out in their like bespoke armor that they had made. Anyway, she was pregnant. And she was staying up late at night with Davy Rizzio, playing cards and music and having a nice time with her new friend who was loyal to her and liked her. But why was she why was she avoiding her husband, who she was just newly married to? Allison, I'm here to reveal that Darnley was a piece of shit. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors, including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go network by listening today. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.
And we're back.
The worst. I have been sitting on my hands for now 45 minutes, so not to yell about how Darnley is the worst human being ever born.
I'm gonna read a quote from this book, Mary Queen of Scots' Downfall: The Life and Murder of Henry Lord Darnley. I forgot to say that's one of my sources, but that's another spoiler title. So this is okay. Despite his careful education, he lacked common sense. Unable to hold his tongue, he revealed everything he was told to his friends and servants, who themselves were not always discreet. He was arrogant, idle, and, when thwarted, could be petulant and uncouth with a violent temper. He was tactless and failed to keep his word. He was also selfish, vain, and extravagant, spending substantial sums on food and clothing. He was often drunk and was openly homosexual. Knox wrote that he passed his time hunting and hawking and other such pleasures as were agreeable to his appetites, having in his company gentlemen willing to satisfy his will and affections. In his History of James VI, Melville recorded that Darnley was much addicted to base and unmanly pleasures. In February 1566, when Mary was pregnant, someone wrote to Cecil of a matter that had taken place too disgraceful to be named in a letter. Such practices were very much the vogue among pleasure-loving males associated with the French court. One of many adverse comments described him as, quote, mentally and morally weak, and his imbecility was conjoined with reckless courage and fatal obstinacy. It is not difficult to understand why he alienated most of those with whom he came in contact. Sir James Melville summarized him as being haughty, proud, and so very weak in mind as to be a prey to all those that came about him. He went on, quote, he was inconstant, credulous, and facile, unable to abide by any resolutions capable to be imposed upon by designing men, and could conceal no secret, let it be either to his own welfare or detriment.
So we're not editorializing here to say that he was the worst. Literally nobody liked this man. There's a lot to unpack in all of the things that you just read about him, and I will just get up on my tiny Darnley soapbox to say that all of his detractors like to throw in and also he was gay as like an equally upsetting thing to he was dumb and he spent a lot of money and he like was a bad person. Like because that's the time period we're in. That's another like automatic negative against him. I do not hate Darnley because he was gay. I hate him and he was gay. Those are two things. I would love history to be able to separate those two things better than it currently does, but he truly had no redeeming qualities as a person. Just in a deeply modern way, he sucked. He's just like the definition of a fuckboy. It's so pedestrian the way that he's awful that it makes me hate him more. He wasn't doing clever schemes or trying to go behind her back and work with like Elizabeth or with a Dutch or someone trying to get an army to get power. He was just Did you see the latest Knives Out movie, Anne?
Yeah,
When
yeah.
Benoit Blanc gets to the end of the movie and he's just like, "It's so dumb. It's just dumb." That's how I feel about Darnley. You're doing all of these things and they're so stupid.
Yeah. And I think he thought he was very clever and smart.
Yes. He absolutely Well, he had been raised since the moment he was born to be like,
Yeah.
"You're the smartest,
Yeah.
handsomest, tallest long boy we've ever seen, and you're destined to be the king of everything." And he did not have the moral fiber to, like you'd have to really careful raising yourself not to become an asshole, and he just didn't have the strength of character to push back against that.
No.
He had
No.
nothing going.
Well, and so, like, when Mary was deciding to marry him, I think there was, like some people were like, "Oh, you shouldn't marry him," and some people were like, "Oh, maybe you should." I think one of her Diggy's uncles was like, "I've heard this guy is kind of an asshole." But the thing to her was like, yeah, but on paper, like, he like, marrying him was so good for her politically because of who he was and what he represented. And who could have known what an absolute nightmare of a person he was? Like, it's very much, Joffrey in Game of Thrones vibes
Yeah.
as well, where it's just kinda like, "Oh, this is just an irredeemably shitty person." Like, this is just
An
there's
incredible
nothing there that's not shitty.
incredible political connection. On paper, this is the ideal match. I would look
Yeah.
at this written down and be like, "Yeah, Mary, no, right choice, for sure. This guy, your kid, gonna take over Europe, for sure." And then you sit down with him and listen to him talk for 5 minutes, and you're like, "Oh, I've made a terrible mistake."
Yeah. So this is where some of the Mary haters, egged on by people at the time who hated her and wrote records of things, they're like, "Oh, she was so in lust with him. She didn't realize that he was an asshole and whatever." Where it's like, to not to his credit, but I think he would hold off showing how much of an asshole he was until like he had sealed the deal. Like, I don't think that was apparent immediately. And people are like, "Oh, she was so carried away by lust and whatever for him." And it's like, politically, she was like, "This is the guy I'm going to marry." But also, there was the thing early on where he fell ill and she kind of nursed him back to health. And I talked about this in the last episode where I think she came out of that situation, like she was hands on nursing him when he was ill. And she came out of that like really determined to marry him. And I think there's some unresolved trauma from how she watched her first husband die, like in bed. And then she was like, this guy, she was able to nurse back to health. So I think there's some sort of like unsolved, what is it, like mother wound?
Yeah.
Anyway, so she married this guy and he's a piece of shit. She's like, whatever, 2 months pregnant. And she's like, oh, okay, like we're going to live separate lives and I will never sleep with him again. This is a nightmare person. So he was drinking a lot. He went to brothels all the time. He acted abusive and aggressive to her in front of other people, the queen. So Maitland, Mary's Secretary of State. Oh, Maitland. Oh, Scottish Machiavelli. The Scottish Machiavelli, Maitland. wrote, "It is heartbreak for her to think he should be her husband." Like, even the like assholes around her were just like, we feel kind of bad for her. Like, this is bad.
If you look at portraits of Mary and Darnley in this period of their marriage, like right before the birth of their
Mhm.
child, you can just see it's the most clear depiction of two people who hate each other that you've ever seen in your life. She, like, barely will put her hand on his hand in these portraits. You can tell she's just sitting there like, "Can I leave yet? Can I leave
She's
yet?" And
inching away. It's just like she's like leaning away from him in portraiture.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the portrait painter would be like, "Can you guys just like scooch closer?" And she's just like, "No."
Nope. Can't.
No. The English ambassador wrote, "I know for certain that the queen repents her marriage, that she hates Darnley and all his kin." He would disappear for weeks on end, drinking and carousing, which was a problem because he was her husband and they were the king and queen. And when official documents had to be signed, like he had to put his seal on them. And so just like everything came to a standstill because he wasn't there to put, he couldn't counterseal the documents. None of her orders had any authority without his seal added. So he's off on a drinking binge or a hunting expedition. Like government had to stop. So Mary, clever girl, had a copy of his seal made and gave it to Davy Rizzio so they could do the paperwork without him.
Which the people who hated the Italians loved.
Yeah, because it's just like now he's acting as the king, right? Anyway, so yeah, Mary, just to remind you of some things. So she's pregnant. It was 16th century Edinburgh. She had some sort of like lifelong chronic illness, like she porphyria or whatever. Everyone around her was like scheming against her constantly. And Darnley was like, "But why don't you have sex with me anymore?"
Also, Darnley is, like, in at least 2nd stage syphilis at this point, so, like, she probably shouldn't have sex with him. He is not an ideal partner.
No, exactly. So, but he was like really, this is like his main thing from now to the end of this episode. He just really was mad that she wasn't fucking him anymore. Anyway, yeah, so he was just really mad about that. And it's like pregnancy, chronic illness, she hates you. Like,
Is this the part where he's also trying to get, like, if she dies as queen, then yeah, I can't remember, but he's going for power as well as sex.
yeah, I forget where I have this, but so yeah, so there's a thing. So he is technically the king of Scotland. Like coins are come out that are like Henry and Mary because his name is Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. He's the king of Scotland, but it's like a it's like a Camilla scenario. He's the consort, right? So if Mary dies, he wouldn't take over.
Which is how it was for Mary in France, right? When Frances died, she couldn't be queen because it was yeah, it's the reverse of that.
Yeah, exactly. So he wanted what was called the crown matrimonial, which would just be a piece of paper that said, like, he is equal to me. And if I die, he can become king after me. Mary sensibly would not give him that because probably he would murder her.
Yeah.
So, but this is the thing. He wanted the crown matrimonial. He wanted to be king because it's like he's been raised to be like the most perfect specialist boy. And to be so he like is the king of Scotland, but he's like, but I'm not fully king yet. So he wanted to fuck her and he wanted the crown matrimonial. And she wouldn't give him either, and he was really mad about it. But instead of looking to himself and thinking, well, how can I improve myself to like get her to trust me enough to do these things? Instead, he was just like, time to go to France and fuck some people, I guess. So yeah, Davy Rizzio. So they had the seal, like Mary and Davy, dream team. Honestly, like she finally had somebody who was like smart politically, who like was loyal to her. Like she didn't have to doubt Davy Rizzio whatsoever. I don't think I talked about this in the last one, but I just want to mention that again, in terms of like anti-Italian xenophobia / racism, people, Davy Rizzio, again, like it's interesting to me how much what people who hated Mary and Rizzio wrote has been taken as fact for like centuries. But he was written about as this kind of like goblin-esque, grotesque individual, which is, it's the same way as being like, Darnley was a shitty person and gay, where it's like Davy Rizzio was Catholic and had too much power and was ugly. It's like you're just trying to add things to it where it's like what we know of him. So like some objective sources who said they wrote that he was of a pleasing appearance, such courteous manners, he made himself beloved by everyone. People said he was like dwarfish and deformed, quote unquote, but also we know that he was very athletic. He went horseback riding with Mary all the time. He was playing tennis all the time, like activities that certainly a dwarf person could do, But I think in 16th century Edinburgh would be unlikely that there would be the accessibility for someone, you know?
Yeah, like 16th century historians, you can always tell when someone has a propaganda agenda because they get real unnecessarily personal. Like it's the whole Richard III situation again, right? Where you're like, he was an evil king and also he was hideous and also the worst president. He ate children. And you're just like, okay, these historians are really trying to legitimize somebody by demonizing somebody else. And you have to think about who's writing what and why. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with, like, a menagerie of cartoon villains instead of an actual historical.
I wanna just build on that as well because I've been watching some TikToks recently. I think the phrase is used as, like, facial differences or something like that. It's, like, people who have just, like, facial differences, like, just, like, genetically because of the way that they look. And they're, just trying to petition, like, Hollywood and stuff to be like, "Can you stop making villains? It's like this person is scarred or or this person, like, they're an amputee or whatever." It's like the villain, like, the shorthand for a villain in so many things. And when I started seeing, like, these advocates talking, I was like, "Oh, fuck, that's true." It's just like, let's make this person they have burns on them or, where it's just like, and that makes them, it's like they're bad, but then you have to like add like some sort of facial or whatever difference to make people. And then if you look at whatever, like Disney movies or anything, like it's getting into like, so it's exactly what you're saying. It's just like, how can we make people think that they're bad? It's like, well, let's give them these stereotypical things, but that's coming from times like this, right? Where it's just like,
Yeah, like,
anyway, it's just,
ableism is not new. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's in all of our commonly accepted historical shorthand, it's in our fairy tales, it's in everything.
yeah, and I think part of it in this era, in Mary's era, comes from because it's the Protestants, right? These are the haters. Her haters are all Protestants, like John Knox. And it comes from a thing where like some people are like God's chosen people, and you can tell who are God's chosen people because they look pretty, you know? So if somebody like has some sort of like facial difference or whatever, it's like that to them was a sign that like, oh, God doesn't like them. So it's a way, it's like self-confirming or something.
And that was, like, went all the way back to, like, what you were supposed to do around a pregnant woman. Like, if a pregnant woman has a sinful thought or looks at something that makes her think something that she shouldn't, then your baby might come out, a facial difference, or you might have, like, an inhuman hairy baby if you look at 2 dogs having sex or something. Like, there's a lot of weird purity, body language projection all tangled up in all of this, and there's lots of interesting stuff written about this. I am by no means an expert in it, but I do think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. And I do want to just really mention that because like stuff about David Rizzio, like I'm so grateful for this one book that I found that like is a biography of David Rizzio that it's so much like last episode, all the stuff that I got was basically from that one biography by David Tweedy, which is interesting because, well, I'll tell you why later, who David Tweedy's ancestors were. But yeah, like so people writing about David Rizzio at the time were just like he was this like quote dwarfish and deformed person, like he was like ugly and whatever and he was funny looking. And then contemporarily, if you look at the Saoirse Ronan Queen Mary movie or if you look at Reign, he's portrayed as kind of like a Jonathan Van Ness-esque gay best friend.
Yeah.
It's leaning into, so it's like not making him like ugly looking, but it's really leaning into the like gay side of things, which is whatever, like maybe he was whatever, but it dismisses who he was as this political power player, which is who he was. I was shocked. I was shocked when I learned all that, Allison.
This podcast is firmly Team Rizzio. Just
Yeah.
love. No matter what other things may or may not be true, he is a legend. He is loyal. He is a good guy.
He is like one of the only truly good people in this story, and he was only ever loyal to Mary, and I respect
Do I
that.
smell Jane Seymour Best Friend Award for this man?
Oh, I haven't thought about that, but you know what? I mean, I can't remember this when we get to the scoring. Anyway, he also liked clothes, which is something else he had in common with Mary, right? She was like an aesthetic person. She was a fashion girly. He owned at least 18 pairs of velvet hose, Allison.
For this time, that's a lot. That's a lot.
He used to sleep on sideways furniture on the floor, and now he was elevated to the point he had living the life he dreamed, 18 pairs of velvet hose. When he was on the job, he would wear his jeweled chain of office. Like he just like struck quite a figure, apparently.
And I'm sure this made everyone think he was even more Catholic and even more awful. with the Protestants standing there in their stiff white collars and their black tunics, being like, "Who is this man and why is he so fancy?"
Well, honestly, like setting aside the fact that Darnley's a piece of shit, you've got like Darnley, Mary, and Rizzio who are just like the Marys. They're just like style, like showing up, just like their ensembles. It's just like amazing. And the Puritans are all just like, we wear start collars.
Yep.
We think that luxury fabric is a sin. Okay, so I need to tell you about one more man. I'm so sorry, but as I read through these biographies, and the way that I'm doing these episodes is I kind of like read this chunk of time in each of the books and then sort of like layer it together to make notes. And then there's so many men I'm not mentioning because
Too many.
who cares? But when somebody becomes crucially important, I have to like put them back in. So this is a guy who we have to talk about. His name is James Douglas because James is the default first name of every person in this story. He is the Earl of Morton. So in all the books, they just say Morton, but I'm going to call him Jam Jam, which is a name that was honestly, when I was researching this, I'm just like, everyone's called James. I can't handle it. And I posted on my Patreon. I was like, what are some nicknames for James? So the Patreons helped me choose the name Jam Jam. Anyway.
I love it.
We're going to always remember who he is, right? So Jam Jam. So he's a Douglas, which means he is related to Darnley because Darnley's mother is Margaret Douglas. So the Douglases are like a major family in Scotland, mostly living around Glasgow region. Anyway, so Jam Jam had been on Mary's side during the chase about raids against Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, but now he was just like a big hater of Davy Rizzio because of how much power he had, right? So Jam Jam also, Darnley adjacent way, was a shitty person. And this is not true, but this is a sort of story that people made up about him, even though he was like a Protestant. So they said that when he was a boy, he found a toad in his garden and ate it live.
What? Okay. That one really feels like the propaganda writer got tired. And they were like, I don't have the energy for another twisted, ugly dwarf. I'm going to just make him eat a toad. I'm done.
Yeah. So Jam Jam, but he's very schemy. So this one quote said, from his youth, he had been renowned for his treachery and of whom his father had no good opinion. So whether or not he ate a toad, he was a shitty person, very duplicitous, and not someone you want as your enemy. And in fact, so Davy Rizzio had wanted to buy this hunting lodge. And he, like this hunting lodge on these grounds, and he and Mary would like ride up there to be like, yeah, Davy, one day this will be your house. Like they like allegedly planted some chestnuts there and the trees still grow. But anyway, the guy who owned the hunting lodge would not sell to him. And that was because the landowner was a cousin of Jam Jam and therefore a Douglas and refused to sell to, a gross Italian Catholic. So he just hated Rizzio. So just Jam Jam is going to pop up regrettably numerous times in this story.
I'm going to think of him a little bit as like Councilman Jam from Parks and Rec, because that's the kind of energy he's bringing to the situation.
Yes, very much. Perfect. That's what Jam Jam is a perfect name. But Davy Rizzio, like he was smart and savvy. He knew lots of people hated him, right? So one pal of his, a priest, tried to warn him. He's like, you know what? Like you're doing really well for yourself. You have 18 pairs of velvet hose. Like why don't you just like go back to Savoy? Like people here want to murder you, bro. The priest told him, your enemies are like geese. If you handle one of them, the rest will fly upon you and pluck you so they will not leave a feather of down on you.
Also, you don't ever want to fight a goose. Like that's an aggressive metaphor.
I don't know if you have geese where you live, but we have geese here. And I like when the geese are in front of me on the path, I walk around them. Like I give geese the space they need. Like,
oh, we have geese. Have you ever looked at a close-up picture of a goose's tongue?
No.
It has teeth on it.
Oh god. They're honestly so scary.
So scary.
So the priest was like, your enemies are like geese. But Davy was like, no, they're just like ducks. Strike one of them and the rest would lie in.
Okay. Rizzio's never fought a goose. He's not sufficiently concerned.
No, it made it out of geese in Savoy. But honestly, he was like, I'm not going to like give the haters the time of day. I'm not going to let them dictate what I do. And you know what? That is a good way to think in some situations. Not this one. But psychologically ones that some listeners might be in today.
I do like that he is kind of bringing Jonathan Van Ness energy to this confrontation where he's just like, you know what, honey, I'm going to be me. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Like he'd made this great life for himself in Edinburgh. He loved it there. He loved the rain. He loved the fog. Yeah, like no shade to Edinburgh. It's a place that I also love. My hair and skin have never been as good as when I was in Edinburgh long ago. I was just like, oh, like genetically on like a DNA level, my body
What?
is like, this is where you're supposed to be. in the drizzle, Anne. Anyway, so he wasn't gonna let the haters get in his way of him just like letting his light shine bright. But also he was so devoted to Mary and he like wanted to be there to help her, right? This is his thing. Like he's so loyal to her. He wanted to protect her. And he knew if he left, like, well, who's gonna do that job? Basically, with so many enemies against her. As per Denise Mina in Rizzio, the novella, which again, like, yeah, it's fiction, but it's like also true. Rizzio knows his life is threatened. Of course it is. He's a proxy for a queen. They resent her power, her sex, her religious devotion, her pregnancy, which has a potential to carry on her Catholic line. They resent the compromise she represents, that there may not be a Protestant Europe now and forever. So people hated him, but it was because they hated her, right? Like, he had a lot of power, but ultimately they hated her. They hated a woman had this power. They hated a Catholic had this power. And he was right by her side as Mary kept being like, let's be cool. Protestants and Catholics can both live in this country. Everyone chill out, which is like continues to be her main thesis statement, which honestly, it also is on Rain. I like to show when something on Rain is accurate. But that was part of like in the last episode, there was a weird thing where Davy Rizzio made Darnley go to a John Knox sermon. And I think that was part of him being like, look, like we can be like Catholics and Protestants can be friends all together. Like we don't have to be at war. Like we can go to each other's religious services. Don't worry about it. So there's a coin minting moment I just wanted to mention because I haven't had a coin minting moment on this podcast in a while. So there was a coin minted called the Ryal, Ryal, which is valued at, well, it was valued at 30 shillings. If you want to buy one now, it's like $700 because they're quite rare. So on one side of it is Mary and Darnley as king and queen. It's like Henry and Maria, or Henricus et Maria, or something. And it's like a portrait of the two of them. And on the back is a picture of a palm tree with a tortoise climbing on it.
Iconic.
Which, yeah. So as per the books I read, the significance of this imagery is unclear.
I was going to say, there are no palm trees in Scotland, as far as I am aware.
No, very much no. So, you know, people are extrapolating like various things like Davy Rizzio. It might be something to do with like historically when some people were being marginalized and then they defeated their enemies, like something like that. Anyway, in some sort of like place with palm trees, maybe Savoy. I don't know if Savoy has palm trees. But anyway, what's crucial here is that there's a tortoise climbing on it. Mary was planning to name Davy Rizzio the head of the mint. That was going to be, which was also a new commission for him that would get him paid less money. And he gave her a gift of a jeweled tortoise. So tortoises were clearly like some sort of like significant thing between the two of them. Like they had some significance that we don't know. And I love that we don't know. It's not like a secret code or cipher. It's just like, I don't know, you know, like on Friends, it's like, he's your lobster. It's like tortoise. I don't know, maybe it meant strength or loyalty or perseverance. But I just love that, like, she put the tortoise on her coin and then she gave him a jeweled tortoise. Like, it just kind of shows their connection to each other.
It's spectacular. Like, I have one friend where whenever we're traveling and we see a little thing with an owl on it, we'll get it for each other. Be like, I saw an owl. I thought of you. That's what it feels like. It's like a tortoise. It's our thing. I saw a tortoise. Made me think of you, Davy. It's really cute.
No, it's really cute. It's the same thing. Yeah, I have a thing with one of my friends where, you know, where it's just like when you're in this, you know, metaphorically, like the stormy seas, like there's the boats and everything. It's just like, just be the mermaid on the rock, just like watching it all happen. So we're like, mermaid, just be the mermaid.
Mhm.
And so like, yeah, so when I see something with a mermaid, I'm like, made me think of you, Megan. Anyway, so tortoise is a thing. In return for the tortoise jewel, oh wait, no, he gave her the tortoise jewel. And then in return, she gave him 6 pieces of cloth in gold patterned with scales like a tortoise.
Aw,
So it's
so he
like
could make a little tortoise jacket?
exactly. It's like a real thing between them. Later on, we're going to talk about when because she hasn't had her baby. She's still just goddamn pregnant. But when she's going to have her baby, she wrote out a will because, you know, women died a lot in childbirth. And she mentioned the tortoise jewel specifically and who she wanted to have it. In the absence of a functional husband/king, Mary relied more heavily on her handpicked group of trusted advisors. So we've got Davy Rizzio. We've also got Bothwell, who you'll recall, who she had brought back to be her military expert, I think, during the Chase-a-boat raids, as well as Cock of the North Jr., who is now on her privy council. So both men were the heads of strong family factions as well, which is crucial. Like Cock of the North Jr. is, the whole North, like everything his father had controlled. Like he could get the 20,000 Catholics, like now he could call on them. And then Bothwell had his family, the Hepburns, no relation to my cat, where they had control in the border region, like near the Scottish-English border. So to cement kind of like these two guys and like those two families being loyal to her, she, Mary, queen of matchmaking, she loves to matchmake others. She matchmade Bothwell married Cock of the North's Jr.'s sister, Jean Gordon. So the last time we saw Jean Gordon, she was with her mother fleeing their house after Mary and her brother had destroyed their entire family, taken all of their tapestries from their house, confiscated their lands, and murdered her father. And then Jean Gordon and her mother then became like Mary's ladies in waiting. And it's all kind of like, this is weird.
Yeah, that's a real sorry, would you like a husband as an apology situation.
Yeah, so she matchmade Jean Gordon to Bothwell. Now, did Bothwell actively have a secret wife from Norway who is currently living in Scotland with their illegitimate son with Bothwell's mother? Yes, but we'll get to that later.
That's neither here nor there.
Don't worry, they were just hand-fasted. It's not a real marriage. Anyway, Mary loved love. She loved giving gifts. And she, like, whenever someone she liked, one of her favorites got married, she would always supply the wedding dress and, like, pay for the banquet. So she supplied a wedding dress for Jean made of some sort of silver cloth. But Jean and Bothwell's honeymoon was short-lived because just 1 week later, Bothwell returned to Edinburgh because Mary was in danger, because Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart's remaining sympathizers were really mad at this point. Why were they mad? So because Parliament was going to meet pretty soon, and one of the things that they were going to talk about at Parliament was removing all the lands and titles from Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart and all of the rebels who had turned against Mary like 5 minutes ago. All of the Chase About raid guys were going to just lose all their lands and titles. I'm like, they didn't already, but they're like, oh no, we have to wait for Parliament to do that. Like, make Parliament meet, dummies.
It does seem like you tried to like actively murder the queen. Maybe you should not be getting money from her, but what do I know?
Yeah, so Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart was concerned about this because it's like, that's my income. So at this point, although he hated Davy Rizzio as well, like everyone knew at this point you had to go through him to get to Mary because he's like the private secretary. Everyone was working under a bribery-based system. He sent Davy Rizzio a huge diamond ring as a bribe.
Should have sent Turtle. Messed up.
Yeah. You know what? That's the secret password. And that's another thing. People were like, Davy Rizzio, he was like so corrupt. He was accepting bribes. It's like everyone was. This, like, it was a bribery-based system. Cecil was taking bribes in England. This isn't weird or unusual.
It's only a problem when he does it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, so this is where we're talking about, Davy Rizzio had wanted to buy that house, but then Jam stopped him from buying him because of anti-Italian racism. Oh, Mary was also thinking of granting Rizzio Scottish citizenship to give him lands and a title and just really moving him up in the world. So Mary was thinking of like giving him even more power, just as she was thinking of like officially like removing the lands and stuff from all her enemies who tried to kill her. Anyway, Darnley, meanwhile, is just like, but what about having sex with me and the crown matrimonial?
Remember me being the worst over here?
Like, surely you don't have enough stressors in your life. Me also.
You can just picture Mary looking at him across the room being like, not now, Darnley. Literally any other time I am busy. And he's just like, but I'm still hot and tall. Please.
Yeah, that just wasn't working for him anymore. He was so confused. You know, like people who are hot and tall, and maybe that's gotten them everything they wanted in their life, and suddenly it doesn't. And they're like, but what else do I have? So just everything, I'm just setting a scene of like everything's just on edge. Like everyone is. And at this point, so Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart and his followers are like, wait, okay, like we don't want to lose our lands. That's the most important thing. And they're like, like we all fucking hate Darnley, obviously, but he's like really easy to manipulate. Like, can we somehow get him to help us? And Darnley was like,
manipulating Darnley is like, he's got the brains of like 3 beans in a plastic bag. So that's not going to be a tricky proposition for them.
No, exactly. So Darnley is like, if you can get me the crown matrimonial, I will do literally anything. You asked me to.
I very famously want 2 things.
Yeah. So then this is the time and the place, but I find it truly bananas. So they signed a literal piece of paper, a document, that said, like, I, Hollywood Icon Jimmy Stewart, will get Darnley the crown matrimonial in the next parliament, and in exchange, Darnley will switch over to my side, recall all the exiles back home, pardon them, and forbid their land from being confiscated. So this was all documented that like Darnley was gonna like supersede Mary's authority, right? And just like do all like if they got him the crown matrimonial, then he would be able to do things as the king himself, not just as husband of Mary.
It is nice when you're committing treason and then you keep a nice, well-documented paper trail of all of your treason and you sign it with your big old name. It's very convenient for me.
What's wild about all of this, and just in terms of like William Cecil in England being just like the best at this shit, it's like so much of this stuff is like, we know this because William Cecil had a copy of this document. Like anytime anyone wrote anything on paper, William Cecil had a copy of it. His spies were like, I can't even emphasize how he knew everything, but also everyone was writing it down on paper. So.
He's like, thank you. I'm very good at my job, but you make me have to work less hard, which is good.
Yeah, let me just put this in my filing cabinet. I'm like treasonous contracts. Great.
Filed under T for treason. Yes.
So, but if Darnley's going to work with them, and they were all Protestants, right? So Darnley was ostensibly Catholic. So they had to have some sort of reason to be like, well, Darnley was Catholic. We need to have some sort of scapegoat to explain like because remember, he was like religiously non-committed. But when he married Mary, he was like, yes, Catholic, great. So they have to be like, no one will believe he's working with us because he used to be Catholic. We have to explain why he became Catholic. And they were like, well, what about if we say Davy Rizzio like seduced him using witchcraft to make him be Catholic? So they decided that Rizzio was going to be the scapegoat in this whole thing. And Darnley was like, that motherfucker, like that guy who I think has been sleeping with Mary, where actually she's just been... He's mad because Rizzio had been spending time with Mary playing cards and music and like having a nice time when she could have been sleeping with Darnley.
Because Rizzio can hold a conversation and like knows more than 10 words. And like, yeah, they're just like buying clothes and looking at turtles together. Darnley, please calm down.
No, exactly. But so they were able to like fuel that now and be like, oh, you know how they play cards together? I think they're also having sex. And maybe she's pregnant with Rizzio's baby, not yours.
Spoiler, she was not.
She was not. But that did, later on, people would lobby that as an insult against Mary's son, who is King James.
Who, by the way, that we're not getting into King James in this season, but a son who takes after his father in a lot of obvious ways. There's never been a less surprising line from father to son than Darnley to King James.
Yeah, I would suggest Darnley's grandfather was Archibald Douglas, who was the dirtbag who got together with Margaret Tudor, and then she had to like point the cannons of the castle at him because he was trying to like kidnap their son. So like from grandfather to grandson to son, there's a real line of just kind of like the like asshole gene is just strong in that lineage. But what's funny too is that, so you know my problematic fave, Charles II?
Hot King Charles, yes.
Yeah, who did have what one might call a Mediterranean complexion. He had, black hair, sort of olive skin. So some people are like, oh, that's the proof that like Davy Rizzio was secretly the father of this whole dynasty. It's like, really? Or was it the fact that his mother was like from Portugal? Anyway, so Darnley's just like, great. Like we're turning on Rizzio, great. And so they decided they were going to murder Davy Rizzio. And a murder squad was assembled and they signed paperwork.
Because of course they did.
We, the undersigned, are going to murder Rizzio. And so the people involved in this, Scottish Machiavelli is on board. Jam Jam, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, the entire Douglas family, along with a guy called Lord Ruthven. Now, in previous episodes, I pronounced this as Lord Ruthven, which is how it is spelled. But I've been informed by Scottish people that you don't say the T, it's Lord Ruthven, which feels very weird for me to say. But he's another major player. So Lord Ruthven is allegedly a necromancer / warlock. So
incredible.
Yeah. So, and I think Lord Ruthven is a good way to pronounce the name of a warlock / necromancer, but it's a common Scottish last name even to this day, and it's pronounced Ruthven. Anyway, he's also on the Douglas side. So basically the Douglases are just like mustering behind Jam Jam. They wrote a letter to Elizabeth and Cecil being like, FYI, here's what we're planning to murder Rizzio.
Put this in your file cabinet right next to the other one.
Like, attached, please find a contract. We all signed. Here's a date we're going to do it on. Like, thanks so much. And Cecil was like, Yeah, Cecil was like, okay. So he did nothing to stop them. Even Bobby Duds, Robert Dudley knew about this. Like, these people not good at keeping a secret. So basically, everyone knew it was going to happen except for Mary and her inner circle. And here's what happened. So Saturday, March 9th, we're getting into a true crime podcast vibe. But unlike some of the books I read, like just the order in which they give the information, I'm going to tell you what happened as it happened. I won't just be like, this happened, and then rewind to explain how it happened. I'm going to just like in order. Like I just told you who the murderers were. So Saturday, March 9th, 1566. Darnley had spent the afternoon playing tennis with Rizzio, which they often did, but to throw off suspicion, basically. Everybody was at Holyrood Palace. Mary was now like 5 to 6 months pregnant. Era. So at around 6 to 7 p.m., Mary was hanging out in her chambers, a room that was not her bedroom, but near her bedroom. It was a small space. It's like 12 feet by 10 feet with incredibly more people than you would think she could fit in that space. But let's discuss the rooms for a minute. And this is where people describe the rooms, but the best description I got was from Denise Minna in her novella, Rizzio. And so Mary's suite of apartments directly above Darnley's in the tower is a mirror of his. Both have a large formal audience chamber served by the same grand staircase, and both have a connecting passage from that room to their respective bedchambers. So a private staircase joins their bedchambers so they can visit each other without anyone else knowing. So they have secret sex stairs between his bedroom to her bedroom.
Which I'm sure Mary does not enjoy having anymore. She's like, can we take those stairs?
Nope. No, can we seal this with a door, like a piece of stonework? Can we like
cask of Amontillado him in the stairwell, maybe?
Yeah. So each of these bedrooms has 2 small rooms leading off into turrets that make up the corners of the tower. Mary likes her little turret rooms. They're cozy and informal and warm, and this is where she's hosting her 12 guests this evening. The guests with highest status are gathered at the table. Various servants and retainers stand or sit against the wall waiting for a turn at the food. And it's Lent era, which is when Catholics don't eat meat, but Mary was allowed to because she was pregnant. And I like that as a rule. Like how, like in Ramadan, like you don't have to fast if you're pregnant or whatever, on your period or things. Anyway, so the guests include her half-sister, whose name is Jean. Everyone is called Jean, the Countess of Argyll. Jean's uncle, Robert Beaton, the Laird of Craich, the master of the Queen's household. That's why he's there. Her half-brother, not Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, but Robert Stewart. Don't know anything else he does her entire life, but he's there at this dinner. A guy named Sir Arthur Erskine of Blackgrange, who was her master of the horse. Mary is a horse girl, so like master of the horse, I think, would be a person she's very close to. Her French apothecary is there, name unknown. A page named Anthony Standen the Younger, and the widow of Cock of the North, the Countess, is also there.
Countess Cock of the North?
Yeah. Countess of the North. Davy Rizzio also there, wearing a splendid gown of furred damask over a satin doublet and russet velvet hose. He had not removed his cap, as was customary when a man was in the presence of the Queen, but we assume Mary knew the hat was part of his look and let him keep it on.
Take the hat off. It's Rizzio. It looks great.
It puts the look together, and she's like, I respect that. Yeah, you need the hat. Anyway, so they're just eating dinner. It's like dark because it's March. It's 7 p.m. In Scotland, pre-electricity. So there's just candles lighting it up. Anyway, downstairs, basically half of the nobles of Scotland, like between 100 to 500 men, led by Lord Ruthven, who, side note, was actively dying of cancer. He looked gruesome. Like everyone said, he was so pale. Like he looked like he was dying of cancer, and he was. But he was such a piece of shit. His wife had recently left him, even though he was dying, because she was like, even if you die tomorrow, that's one day too long being married to you. So Lord Ruthven and Jam Jam rushed into the castle, stole the keys from the guards, secured the gates, overcoming the guards on duty. Denise Mina says, they are skittering around in the dark, 200 of them, crowding the entrances and overwhelming the guards. They've already confiscated all the keys and secured the gates. The men are to go upstairs by the private stairs, cross Mary's bedchamber and enter the audience room, unlock the main door to the stairs, and let the soldiers into her parlor. So basically, they go into Darnley's room. Then they go up a couple of them just go up the secret sex stairs, sneak across, and then open the main door so that they can come in the main door, basically. So meanwhile, the other people are just like capturing the castle, right? They're just like overcoming the servants and whatever in the rest of the castle. And these men are mostly Douglases, which is notable because they shouted their traditional war cry, a Douglas, which is...
We could have done better.
I'm not like a fan of that. Like... A foster. Like
we could have workshopped that one for about 5 more minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But that's kind of like how you know they were there. Anyway, so they scattered servants, knocked over candles, capturing the castle so nobody inside could escape. Or so they thought. Asterix, we'll get back to that point. So basically, Darnley came up the secret sex stairs. And then which there's like a tapestry, so he like flings the tapestry aside to be like, it's me.
Okay, that's the most Darnley way to enter a room, though, is fleeing aside a tapestry while coming up the sex stairs. It's real grandmama, it is I, Anastasia energy as I enter any
Yes.
given room.
No, very, very. And then he comes in, and his job is just to distract them while the other people are sneaking around to open the other door, right?
Which he's great at because he has 3 brain cells and he's very tall, so it's easy to look at.
So he just kind of comes in, and Mary's like, what are you doing here? There's not like a plate made for you. And he's like, that's okay. I already had supper. Don't worry about it. Anyway, meanwhile, Lord Riven goes up the sex stairs and then sneaks behind the tapestry to open the door and let the others in. I do want to say also, which is impressive, no one heard anything because Lord Riven, for no reason at all, and everyone then even thought it was weird, was wearing a full suit of armor.
What a weirdo.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, you have to be quiet. It's like, okay, well, I wore this entire suit of armor and I'm actively dying. So let's see how this goes. Anyway, apparently it went okay. He made a noise and Mary's like, what's that noise? And Darnley's like, noise? It's a cat outside. I don't know.
Wearing a full suit of armor. Don't worry about it.
Maybe one of the suits of armor in the hallway just toppled over. Anyway, so Lord Riven bursts in looking like a whole mess. And he's like, where is Davy Rizzio? And Mary quickly figures out what's going on. And she's like, okay, I get you don't like Davy Rizzio. Like, shall we meet in Parliament and impeach him sort of thing? Then she turns to Darnley to be like, did you know that this was happening? And he's like, me? What? So Mary commanded Riven to leave the room or else be arrested for treason. He ignored her, which was shocking to all the men in the room. So the men in the room, again, Mary's brother Robert, the master of the horse, the French apothecary, all the men tried to grab him. But then he drew out a pistol and that stopped him. He drew out a pistol from his armor, unclear. So then Riven also pulled out a dagger. So I guess pistol in one hand, dagger on the other hand.
This seems like overkill. Whatever he's doing, it's too much.
Yeah, no, Riven, that's what it is too much. He is too much, this whole situation. But yeah, piecing this together for this episode, like I was going between book to book and each one had, like there's certainly commonalities in how they describe what happened, but what I really settled on was like a few days after this happened, Mary wrote a letter and I'm just relying mostly on how she described it. So he pulls out a dagger, advances on Davy Rizzio. Davy Rizzio reaches for his own dagger, but he fumbles, drops it, and then he just like goes into sort of like, there's sort of like a sticky out part of the tower, like where the windows are, and he's kind of like hiding there. He gets behind Mary. Mary's like, no one gets to my best friend. I'm the tortoise now. I'm protecting him like a tortoise shell. So he's just like behind her, like clinging, like on the ground, I think, because he's trying to pick up his dagger, just like clinging to her skirts. Then 6 more murderers come into the room. A violent struggle ensues in which the table, remember, they were having like a dinner for 12 in this corner. The table was overturned. Everything on it came crashing to the ground, including all the candles. Jean, Mary's half-sister, managed to save one lighted candle, which together with a firelight illuminated the scene. But also, Jean stopped the candle from like lighting the nearby tapestry on fire and killing them all. So, good job, Jean. So this is where last night where I live, there was 2 nights ago, there was a thunderstorm and the power went off. And I was like, oh, it's so dark. And I'm like, dark, like that night in the turret. And I turned on the flashlight on my phone and I was like, this is like the candle held by Jean. Anyway, so I think the darkness adds to just like the confusion, the scariness, right? So Riven manhandled Mary out of the way and like told Darnley, like, keep a hold on her. And so Darnley did. One of the murderers, I don't understand this, brutally rammed a chair towards her stomach. I don't know if that was intentional or not, or if it's just kind of like furniture is everywhere.
Well, she's pregnant at this point, right?
Yeah. But then another pointed a pistol at her stomach and maybe would have fired it, but the gun refused to give fire. So it's kind of like, they're like, we will kill you and your unborn child if you don't stop protecting Davy Rizzio. Then one of the Douglases grabbed Darnley's, like, this is just chaotic, right? Like, and it's dark and what's happening. Anyway, so one of them thrust Darnley's dagger towards Davy Rizzio over Mary's shoulder, and she said that she could feel the steel on her throat, like it was so close. Davy was likely wounded by this blow, and the dagger was left sticking out of him. Then Anthony Standen, who was one of the pages, he's like the servant. So he grabbed, like some guy was pointing a dagger at Mary. Anthony Standen pointed it away. Later, he would tell Mary's son, James, as an adult, that he had saved his life and that of his mother. Did he, Anthony Standen? I don't know. But okay. So Davy Rizzio is still crouching behind Mary's skirt, clinging on with his fingers, and then somebody starts brutally bending his fingers back, potentially breaking them to make him stop clinging, and then he was dragged, kicking and screaming. So first they dragged him down the sex stairs into Darnley's room, where the other conspirators were waiting, but then they're like, change your mind. So then they dragged him back up the sex stairs, through Mary's bedroom, and out into the front entryway, where he was stabbed 56 times.
Entirely too many times.
Literal overkill.
These are the worst murderers in the whole world. They brought 200 people to stab one man 56 times. The guy who had dropped his knife to the ground 2 seconds into the battle. It's just gross.
So I think the stabbing of 56 times was sort of they all wanted, so maybe 56 people were in the room at the time or something. They wanted, he was clearly dead by the time stab number 56 happened, but it was they all wanted to be this is our pact. We signed a piece of paper. We're all going to stab it. No spoilers, a Julius Caesar thing / the end of Agatha Christie book. I will leave unnamed because it's a surprise ending. Anyway, so while they were doing that, Darnley was not in the stabbing area. He was back with Mary, but someone else had taken his dagger. And then after they stabbed Rizzio, they left Darnley's dagger in the body as proof Darnley had been complicit in the murder, even though he hadn't actually stabbed. And that's where Darnley was like, wait a minute, am I a scapegoat? This is where he might have started thinking that. Anyway, Davy Rizzio, R.I.P., his final words were, Madama, io son morto, which means, Madame, I am dead. And note, the place where Rizzio was stabbed can be viewed by anyone who visits Holyrood now. And the red stain on the floor is said to have lasted nearly 5 centuries, defying any attempt to clean it off. Although one of the books, I think it's Claire Hunter's book, says she's like, I feel like the stain is bigger and a bit redder than last time I was here, but I don't say anything. Don't want to spoil the illusion. It's no matter how much we clean it, the blood stays. But there's a little plaque being this is where allegedly Davy Rizzio was killed. So R.I.P. If you're anyone, if you're in Edinburgh, if you go to Holyrood, just moment of silence at the place where Davy, because he was a real one. Can we just say, I love him. He was great.
If they let you leave little things at the plaque, bring a little tiny turtle.
Little turtle. That's what I would leave. Oh, it's a beautiful idea, Allison. Yeah, you know what? He was loyal to Mary to the end. So his body was just there. His body was thrown down the stairs and then thrown across a wooden chest in the porter's lodge by the door. The porter got to take his fancy clothes, his whatever russet velvet hose and his hat. The porter allegedly said something about ironic. When Davy first came to this palace, he had to sleep on a chest in the hallway, and now he's laying on a chest again. That's a very Shakespeare's porter sort of wise thing to say. And then the next day, the body was buried in a pauper's grave in the Canongate Cemetery near the door to Holyrood Abbey. And now we're into the aftermath of the murder. I'm just curious how long. Oh, this is going to be a long ass episode.
We could probably do a whole hour-long episode just us describing the scuffle in the tower.
Yeah, true. This all happened. Mary is just in her little turret room. I guess her sister holding one candle. Darnley is there. Riven is there. And Riven decided the time was right for, impromptu marriage counseling.
Jesus Christ, man.
He's like, why don't you fuck Darnley? That's why he's upset. That's why this happened.
He just clanks over there in his giant suit of armor and be like, hey, I have a thought.
Yeah. No, literally, this is what he does. This has just happened. And he's like, you know what? You should let him fuck you. And then Mary said, it is not the woman's part to seek the husband, and therefore it is in that the fault was his own. So I guess she's like, he needs to come down the sex stairs. I'm not going up the sex stairs. But yeah, anyway, Riven was just like, you just gotta fuck your husband more often. That'll solve all the problems. And Mary was like, oh, really? Should I ask your wife about that, who just left you? In fact, quote, she said, why may not I leave him as well your wife did her husband?
Ooh, sick burn, Mary.
Exactly. So then he called for some wine because he was thirsty, and he started just mansplaining in a sort of little sermon, why what they did made sense because Rizzio was making the country Catholic, and it's just how Brutus had to stab Julius Caesar for tyranny reasons, which can I just point out, neither Mary nor Davy Rizzio was doing anything whatsoever tyrannical. They were let's bring this to Parliament and have everyone vote on it. every time they wanted to do anything. Like there's not a tyrannical, let's make the country Catholic happening. Mary said, quote, "If I die in childbirth as a result, I will leave the revenge to my friends to be taken of you, Lord Riven, and your posterity. I have the King of Spain and the Emperor, my great friends, and likewise the King of France, my good brother, with my uncles of Lorraine, besides the Pope's Holiness and many other princes in Italy." So basically, she's just like, I'm going to destroy you.
If I die, the Pope's going to come whoop your ass, is what she said.
Yeah. Anyway, so the asshole murder squad, not done yet. They also wanted to murder Bothwell and Cock of the North Jr. because those were Mary's other advisors. Where were these guys this whole time, one might ask? At this point, they were also at Holyrood, but chilling in their own room, waiting to be served their own meal, not knowing that all the servants were being held hostage. But then they heard, a Douglas, a Douglas.
They're like, oh, the war cry of the Douglases.
So they were like, oh my God, something's happening. So then everyone took up weapons to help out, including the cooks. So they like rallied as many servants as they could find. The cooks who took the sharp spits the meat was roasting on as weapons. I feel like people just like taking a stapler or like whatever. They're all just like, we'll help. So they ran to Mary's room, but inside the conspirators were like, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. And then Riven came out of the room in his clanking in his armor and with a glass of wine, like, let's share some wine. So Bothwell and Cock of the North Jr. were like, thanks, no thanks. And so they fled. They, in fact, fled all the way out of the building through a small window that overlooked a small garden, which is allegedly where the over-the-hill lions lived. There was a royal menagerie, including lions, who were clearly not very active or hungry because they were able to just like scoot out that way. Then, as per Denise Mina, lights are appearing, first one, then another, then 5 or 20, and they're coming straight for the palace gates. The men of the city of Edinburgh, remember they love her. 400 citizens walk in formation, carrying torches that form a river of fire. These are the ordinary men of the town who have sworn to keep the peace, called from their beds by the keepers of the watch. They are all of a single mind, armed with lances and torches, fueled by fierce loyalty to the queen. So the people of Edinburgh, like, again, her secret weapon, they come by and they're like something is happening. What is happening? They stop below her windows and they're like, we demand to see her, bring Mary to the window. Darnley went to the window and he's like, don't worry, it's fine. I'm the king now.
And they're like,
I am the captain now.
No, this is not what we, the people of Edinburgh, wanted to happen.
No. Meanwhile, Mary was in the room guarded by men who were like, if you make one sound, we will murder you. So the keepers of the watch were like, okay. Anyway, Mary obviously didn't sleep at all that night, but she was kept company by the Countess, the widow of Cock of the North, and her other ladies. And this is crucial. In the morning, Darnley returned and they like argued.
Yeah, can you imagine what that fight must have been like?
Why won't you fuck me?
Because you just stabbed my best friend and threw his body down the stairs. Bro, what do you think?
Yeah. But so at some time overnight, one of the ladies had seen the stabbed body of Davy Rizzio and told Mary, like, yeah, no, he's for sure dead. And she cried. And then she said, no more tears. I will think upon a revenge.
Yes, my girl.
And she did. So anyway, meanwhile, the asshole murderers were just like all hanging out together in the castle being like, amazing. No, we're like the kings or whatever. But again, Denise Mina puts this perfectly. These men know they are great. They feel confident they have just changed the course of history with the forcefulness and righteous vengeance. They haven't. Their plans will be usurped by a dumpy widow woman carrying a piss pot. So, Mary needed to exchange communication with the outside world, specifically Bothwell and Cock of the North Jr. And the way that she knew how to do that, in a callback to anyone who's heard Allison in my episode about the Bushrangers, is to weaponize her female body. So when Darnley returned to check up on her, she pretended she was miscarrying.
We love a fake pregnancy diversion. It's so good.
Yeah. And so she's like, oh no, I'm miscarrying. And it's because you won't let me see my midwife. So Darnley's like, oh no. So then she was allowed to see her French physician and her midwife, who were both loyal to her. And they were both like, oh yeah, she's totally miscarrying. You know what will stop this miscarriage? If all of her ladies in waiting are allowed to see her again. And Darnley was like, okay, sure. That's how pregnancy works. Great. But Riven and Jam Jam, to their credit, were suspicious because I think they said at this point, it's like she was raised by the de Guises and Catherine de Medici. Like, don't trust her, bro.
And Darnley's like, well, how am I supposed to know how the female body works? I've never once thought about that in my whole life. I assume this is normal.
Yeah. So they were like, is she going to switch clothes with one of the ladies and flee? A good option. Her guards were doubled. Nobody was allowed to leave the room while wearing a face covering or a muffler in case like she tried to leave in disguise. Like, here's the thing. She was good, but like they knew she was good. Darnley didn't. Anyway, so one of the ladies, so she's allowed to see, is the Countess, widow of Cock of the North. So remember, Cock of the North's family, the Gordons, they hate Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart because they blame him for having destroyed their family.
Rightly.
Yeah. And they know that it was him, not Mary. Like she was complicit in that, but it was because she's taking his advice. Anyway, so the Countess had been in touch with her son, Cock of the North Jr., who was off with Bothwell wanting to help. And so she had messages to pass along from them. So because the Countess had 12 children, she was trusted in like a midwife adjacent situation. She was like, I need to take Mary into the other room to pee, and we need to be alone for pregnancy reasons. And they're like, that makes sense. So she and Mary went and they were talking in private. And so she passed along intel that Bothwell and Cock of the North Jr. had raised some troops. So if Mary could just like descend through a window by means of a rope ladder, they would be waiting to receive her. And the Countess was like, I could smuggle in the rope ladder, maybe concealed in a food tray. And Mary's like, I'm 6 months pregnant, and that's not the plan I'm going to do. Thank you. Anyway, so she was like, the whole time they were talking, Mary was peeing into like a little chamber pot thing. And then the guys were like, they've been talking for too long. And then they came in and she's like peeing. And she's like, I'm just peeing into this little pee pot. And they were like, okay. She had given the Countess a letter with instructions. And the Countess stuck it like inside of her like undershirt layer next to her skin. And the guards were like, we're going to like frisk this person leaving. But it's like an old lady. And they're like, well, it's an old lady carrying a piss pot. We're not going to like whatever. So anyway, she left carrying the piss pot with Mary's secret instruction letter on her body. So later that night, because this is like the next night, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart came to town and Mary was like, bring him to me, please. And he was like, oh, if only I'd been here last night, I wouldn't have let them treat you so badly. And she's like, what the fuck, bro? like if you want to get on my good side, like, can you free me from this castle situation? And he's like, we'll see. Because he just always is playing both sides. Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. He's also never there when the shit goes down. He's always like conveniently out of town, even though he like plans everything. Anyway, so Mary knew her best chance to escape was via manipulating Darnley. She knew he was stupid, cowardly, vain, drunken, dissolute, narcissistic, and also violent, vindictive, and a skilled liar. So she had to use him as a weapon. So Darnley was, meanwhile, like, remember that they had left his dagger in Rizzio's body, and Darnley was like, wait a minute, why did they do that? So he's starting to be like, are these guys on my side or not? So she was left alone with Darnley, and she's like, listen, like, if you help me escape, I will have sex with you. And he was like,
the only thing I've ever wanted, other than the crown matrimonial.
Yeah. But basically, she was like, so come back tonight and I'll have sex with you. But she knew that he was going to be drunk and passed out. And in fact, he was. So in the morning, he was like, oh, fuck. And he like came up the secret sex stairs, and Mary was asleep or pretending to be, making him wait for an hour until she was ready to speak to him.
Yes.
And then she's like, oh, I totally would have had sex with you last night, but like now this morning I feel unwell. Sorry about that. Anyway, so she used all of her skills of manipulation that she learned growing up with the de Guises, Catherine de Medici, but also using, like, honestly, the truth. She was like, look, as soon as these assholes have their pardons, they're going to ditch you, and they're not going to give you the crown matrimonial, bro. Why would they when they already have what they want? So she persuades him to help her escape. And in fact, he agreed. So she knew where to go because the Countess had been like secretly smuggling her letters, and she knew where Bothwell and Cock of the North Jr. were waiting. So the plan was to pretend that she, for pregnancy reasons, had to leave.
Pregnancy reasons explains so much, because not a single man in this castle is going to be like, can you tell me more about your pregnancy? Can you please explain more to me about the female reproductive system? They're all just like, must be correct. Go right ahead.
Exactly. It's also mysterious to them. So her midwife and a French physician came in and they were like, you know what? Like, she's totally having a miscarriage. The only way to like have her not miscarry is to move her to a different castle with sweeter and pleasanter air. And Darnley's like, that sounds true. That sounds true. So he convinced them. What they said was, Mary said she would sign the papers. And they're like, okay, well, as soon as she signs the papers, we will remove her guards and we will leave. Darnley was like, oh yeah, Mary like looked at the papers. She thought they were great, but she was sick and couldn't sign them tonight, so she'll sign them tomorrow. So if you could just remove the guards now, that would be great. And so that's what they did, because the assholes were foolish and thought that Mary had given in to them. And so shortly after midnight, Mary and Darnley, the guards were removed. They slipped out a secret passage in the wine cellar, and then they met 6 of their most trusted servants who had fetched her horses. At the last minute, Darnley was like, but can my father come also? And Mary was like, categorically no. So then they rode hard through the night. So this was like a 5-hour horse ride, the 25 miles away.
She is still 6 months pregnant at this point. So
Yeah.
not easy.
And I don't think she even got to eat dinner. Darnley was like, ride faster, woman. And she was like, I'm pregnant, you asshole. And he was like, well, if you lose this baby, we can have others.
If we just keep having sex, aka the only thing I want.
Yeah. So Mary was like, push on and take care of yourself. And he did. So he just like rode away ahead of them,
Because of course.
basically abandoning them. Anyway, so partway there to this castle, they're going to Bothwell, Cocklehouse Jr., and other helpful, loyal people were waiting for them. And they arrived at 5 a.m. to Dunbar Castle. And I love this detail. So, like, all this had happened. I just said, did she even have supper? She's pregnant. All this stuff had happened. She arrived and she was like, bring me fresh eggs. And they were like, okay. And then she like cooked scrambled eggs for everybody.
Yes, queen.
Literal, yes, queen. Like, she loves scrambled eggs and she knows that they need some breakfast and she made them herself. And I love that.
It's a real stop at Denny's after a wild night out kind of move. And that's great. I can relate to that.
Exactly. So she wrote a letter to Elizabeth right away being like, hey, these guys are probably going to flee to England and you better not help them. She also rewarded Bothwell for helping out by giving him wardship of this castle, which is called Dunbar Castle. And because the everyday people loved her, right? Even though they didn't care one way or another about Davy Rizzio specifically, they're like, someone's going after our queen who we love. So more families like the Hepburns, Bothwell's family, the Hamiltons, the family of Arran, the Gordons, Cock of the North family, and others from the borders came to defend her cause. And within 5 days, the asshole rebellion had collapsed, and Mary returned to Edinburgh with her supporters, a triumphant return. And that's the end of today's story. A happy ending.
Except for Rizzio, R.I.P.
Except for Rizzio, R.I.P. R.I.P. But like Mary, triumphant.
As
I like
she should.
exactly scrambled eggs and all. So Allison, can you please tell everybody again about your books?
Sure. I have 2 books if you like historical nonsense, etc. My first book available now is called A Tip for the Hangman. It is tangentially about Mary, Queen of Scots, in her final scheming era, which we will get to later on this podcast. I have another book coming out in October, which is called Let the Dead Bury the Dead. It is a 19th century Russian alternative history, and you can pre-order that now if you like to. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, Dirtbags Through the Ages. Just Google that and it will pop up.
And I'll just remind everybody that I forget to say this sometimes, but I also have a newsletter that I haven't updated in a while, but I'm sure I will soon. It's called 3nicethings.substack.com, and that's where I talk about non-women's history things. I mostly talk about murder mysteries. So honestly, like this episode is my jam to be like murder mystery adjacent. Anyway, also recently we've started having transcripts available of the podcast, which are courtesy of Aveline Malik from The Wordery. So if you go to vulgarhistory.com, the most recent episodes, there's a link in those to see transcripts of recent episodes. And we have our new and improved store. So vulgarhistory.com/store is where I suggest you go if you're in the US. And if you're international, I suggest you go to vulgarhistory.redbubble.com, where the shipping is better for non-US countries. We have Where's Your God Now, John Knox design by Jennifer Ferguson. We have the Reformation, Renaissance, Girl Squad, Goth Queen, Mom Friend, designed by Karen Moynihan. The Flying Squadron emblem by Jan Jupiter. And yeah, just some real weird merch. I feel like we need to do some sort of like R.I.P. Davy Rizzio tortoise design, but
We've got to do You're My Tortoise.
Bejeweled tortoise. I love it. And then also, if you want to support this podcast, you could also support me on Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter, that's where if you give a monthly donation, then that money goes towards things like me having an editor, hiring a transcriptionist, getting artists to design merch. Anyway, so on the Patreon, if you pledge at least $1 a month, then you get early access to all the episodes as well as ad-free access. If you pledge at least $2 or more a month, you get that. And also you can vote on polls of things like, what should I call this guy called James in the story? Jam came from that. And then if you pledge at least $5 or more, you get access to the bonus podcasts, including one that Allison does with me and our other friend Lana Wood Johnson called Vulgar Piece Theater, where we talk about costume dramas. I also do So This Asshole episodes that you can get if you're on the Patreon. And I have said, and I will stick to this, that once I get to 500 people following me on Patreon, I will do So This Asshole, John Knox. But know that that is the only circumstance in which I will do that. But also, if you want to try, this is a new thing, if you want to try and see what Patreon is like, now you can try a 7-day trial. So if you want to just if you have a week off work and you want to binge all the bonus content, one could. Yeah, so I'm excited about the 7-day trial so people can see what it's like. People who haven't been able to join, or if you're not in a position where you're able to support me on Patreon, you can still get access to that stuff for 7 days. Anyway, that's all, patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And next week, Allison is going to be back, and we're going to be talking more about what happens next in this weird saga full of people all called James, and our 6-foot-tall queen, and what she does next.
There will be some explosive reveals in the next episode. You don't want to miss it.
I see what you did. Thank you so much, Allison. And so for all the listeners, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Ann Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Marachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Buntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Buntwine, wherever podcasts are available.